I'm delighted to say we're joined by Frankie Mackay, Canterbury Magicians batter and talkSPORT commentator. And we're delighted to say that Harmy and I will be working with Frankie in the very near future. Frankie, let's talk about, well, all aspects of the series. Excitement really, really building. But Tim Southee set to retire from Test cricket, an absolutely illustrious career. Before I ask you about him and his career, let's hear from the man himself.
You look at it and it's a marquee series against a great opposition, one obviously which started again against all those years ago, and you sort of look at it and it feels right. One last chance at three grounds that have been pretty good to me, and places I really love playing at. So it's sort of conversations with close ones, and this is where we sort of landed. But yes, it's a tough decision, but I think it's the right one. Also got some promising young bowlers coming through, which I've thoroughly enjoyed working alongside, and hopefully taught them a thing or two along the way, and they've certainly taught me a thing or two as well. Just so that's been a pleasure, and it's their time now to keep driving this team forward.
That's Tim Southee saying it's the perfect time to retire. There's always a danger with a legend of the game, Frankie, that it can in some way overshadow the actual series itself. And I know that Tim, like all great players, wouldn't want that to be the case. But I guess it just seems the right thing to do, not just at this stage of his career, but I remember telling several players who didn't want a fuss being made about their retirement that actually the fans want to make a fuss. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think when you've played for so long, you don't want to say you've earned a send off, and I think everyone dreams of having that fairy tale finish and what that looks like. But the smart people know when's a good time to get out, and I think Tim's got it pretty close to spot on. And in recent years, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of chatter and a lot of noise around his performance, or some people would say lack of performance, lack of wicket taking. And you just don't ever want your greats to get to that position that people are saying, why does he keep playing? Why does he keep playing? Why does he keep playing? You'd actually rather they probably said, why does he have to retire? And I think if you can strike that balance right, then you've done a good job. And I think for him, the fact that he's seen the way this New Zealand team's progressed, seen the way that they've played, he's had a really big say in that leadership piece as well. And then now kind of getting to the point that he can actually look at those fast bowling stocks and say, we're in a good spot. We're in a really good spot here. I don't have to keep running myself into this ground for the team. We've actually got guys who can do it, who are going to be really successful. I've taught them what I know. I've been around. I've passed on everything. I'm still loving my cricket. I'm still enjoying it. I still feel like I've got a little bit left in the tank to offer. And so I think he's nailed it. I mean, we'd all love to see him. I think he needs four more sixes to go to 100 Test match sixes. I think everyone would love to see him do that. They'd love to see him take another bag of wickets before he goes out, and really they'd probably love him to be able to finish off at his home ground of Hamilton. He's a Northern Districts boy. So yeah, I think he's got it pretty spot on. And he talks a bit about the symmetry, debuted against England, finishing against England, what that'd be like. So yeah, I think it's sad when any legend it comes to the end of their career, but I think he's got it pretty spot on.
Frankie, when Tim does finish in Hamilton, where does he rank above the history of New Zealand cricketers? He's took 770 wickets so far, I think, across all formats. Made his debut against England as a 17-year-old. It's been some stellar career. Where does he rank among the great players of New Zealand cricket?
I think he's actually got to be right up there. I think when you're talking about the greats of the game, the greats of the New Zealand game, he has to be a name that you mention in there. Whenever you think of New Zealand success, you're thinking of guys that have performed really well. I mean, World Test Championship, he was a big player in that team, making white ball finals. He's been a big part of that. He's had the captaincy in all three formats of the game. I just think, yeah, I think he does. He goes down as one of New Zealand's greats, and he'd probably talk it down that he's not. that he's a medium pacer who loves to just give it a whack, and he's had a great time playing with his mates. And he'd say that he's played with way more talented players, that he's played with better players, he's played with people with better numbers that probably he'd think deserve the limelight a little bit more. But to me, he's pretty quintessential New Zealander, and he's just been really good at what he's done for a long period of time, and that kind of no fuss attitude around it as well. And yeah, you're probably not going to say he's up there with Richard Hadlee. I think everyone, when you're talking about pure fast bowling greatness for New Zealand, Richard Hadlee sits at the top. But when you start looking at those names, the next few down, he'd be one of the guys in the conversation straight away. So yeah, I think he does. I think he goes down as one of New Zealand's greats.
Talking of Richard Hadlee, I remember I can go back as far as Richard Hadlee and Ewan Chatfield, and thinking of New Zealand pace attacks. Uh, am I right in thinking that they have never been stronger? There's never been a greater depth, and the number of pace bowlers. And Nathan Smith is a new name. I mean, there's half a dozen really good fast bowlers around at the moment. But Nathan Smith is one that probably our listeners and viewers won't be familiar with. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, he's a really promising. Oh, I mean, youngsters probably being a little unfair to him, but he's new kid on the block at the moment, is set for a debut in the Test match format. He's just had his white ball debut at the moment, and he's a really good cricketer. He's pretty street smart with it. He's capable of some moments of brilliance. He bowls kind of mid 130s. If he's having a great day, he'll push up into the early 140s. He's got the ability to swing the ball both ways, nibble the ball around. Everyone would kind of say he bowls a heavy ball, hits the bat hard, and then he's actually probably getting close to that genuine all-rounder status. Maybe not yet in the Test match format. That might be a little stretch too far at the moment, but he'll definitely be a very, very competent number eight. He's a very handy batter. He's got a good record, whether it's red ball, white ball, and he's just the kind of cricketer that when you watch him, just he makes things happen. And I think he's just got a little bit of that X factor that they like, that he's just got something about him that's just a little bit different. He's a phenomenal athlete. He's got himself in really great shape after a couple of back injuries, which tends to be the fast bowler way. You've got to go through that before you get to that point that the body's a little bit more resilient and hardened up. But he's just a great guy. He's really down to earth. He's a lovely character. He gets a little bit of that fast bowler's white line fever when he gets over the line and gets into competition. And yeah, he's just the kind of guy that he'll run through a brick wall for his team, and from time to time he's got the ability to do something really special. And I think that's what the selectors like about him is just that little bit of something different.
Right, Frankie, you've had easy questions. Now, Kane Williamson's back after India. Who does he replace? Because that is selection. That's some headache. It's a nice headache because you've got the great player back. But who does he replace? Because they all performed in India.
Gosh, yeah, that's the $1 million question at the moment. I think everyone's asking. To my mind, there is no question of Kane Williamson not being selected. There's been a couple of pundits throw it out there that maybe you just leave Kane out, maybe you just roll with that team from India. It's not happening. We are seeing Kane Williamson line up. He will be there. And so for me, the big question is how much they value the ability to have Glenn Phillips bowling some offies in the Test match, especially at Hagley first up. Hasn't been a ground where spinners have been hugely successful. Hasn't been a ground where New Zealand's bowled a lot of spin themselves. So that's probably the first question. If they feel they need to have a spin option, then it becomes Glenn Phillips. He has to play. So then all of a sudden you start looking at, well, then we've got to look at Daryl Mitchell in the middle order. Does he come under a little bit of scrutiny? Again, I don't think Rachin Ravindra is going anywhere. I think he is the future of this team. So I think he will be a lock-in. And then it's whether you put Youngie back in that tough position of perhaps he goes back to the top of the order where he hasn't been quite as successful. And then it's probably a Devon Conway who misses out. Because of course Tom Latham, he's got the skipper's armband now. You're not getting rid of him. So yeah, I think unfortunately it's probably you're either looking at Mitchell, you're looking at Phillips, and possibly if you're going with the four seamers, then it might be that you want that little desire to have Phillips rather than the backup bowling that Mitchell offers. But heck, it's a heck of a conundrum to find yourselves in ahead of a series that you're listing off guys that have been hugely successful the last 12, 18 months and saying, well, which one's going to run the drinks this time around? So a really nice position to be in. There's still always little question marks. I think Tom Blundell's been a little bit light for runs, but he's the guy with the gloves on, and I don't see that changing. I don't see that's going to come into it. The only option really you've got around that is Latham takes the gloves and goes down to batting 6. I can't see it with the captaincy thrown in there as well. So for mine, the ones that look a little bit vulnerable is probably Mitchell or Phillips. So be a bit of a toss up, but yeah, lovely position to be in when you're trying to find out how do you fit Kane Williamson back into a lineup, and with how well Will Young played, I think you just have to find a spot for him.
I suppose Conway, Devon Conway could keep, but my goodness, after what they did in India, it would be incredibly hard to leave any of those out. I'm very glad that that's not a selection I would have to make. I have to ask you about world champions, Frankie. What an extraordinary performance from the White Ferns. Absolutely staggering. I mean, they lost 10 in a row going into the T20 World Cup, and then they won the thing. I don't suppose you're going to pretend you saw that coming, are you?
Well, it's one of those things. It's obviously a team that's very dear to my heart, and the people in it. There's a lot of care and a lot of love for. But there's been some pretty tough times. It's been pretty grim, the last couple of years as to some of the results. And I was over commentating the tour of England, and it was bad. They would freely admit they played really poorly. It was pretty hard being the only Kiwi in a box sitting there with the Poms as they're giving us an absolute kicking every single game. That got a little bit tough going after 4 weeks of that, but there were some signs there. I think that they went over to Australia and played a little 3-game series before heading over to the World Cup. Lost 3-0, but it just felt like the team was playing different cricket. Just felt like a different vibe to things. There were more smiles, there was more energy about it. They were making mistakes still, but trying to go about it in the right way. And it just felt like there was a little bit of a switch there. And actually Katie Martin was over at the World Cup, and we were chatting over WhatsApp and talking about that first match up with India. And we both just kind of had this feeling like we're a good chance here. We'll tip these guys up, and then that gives us a good run. You've just got to beat Sri Lanka, you've just got to beat Pakistan. All of a sudden you're in the semi-finals. You never know what happens from there. And it just kind of, I think it just built a little bit of momentum. You get back to winning ways, and then all of a sudden all the other teams did the hard work for New Zealand, I think. And so when it got to semi-finals time, and you don't have to play Australia in semi-finals, India's already gone. They didn't have to play England. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, West Indies. Oh, all right, we maybe match up okay against them. That feels good. And then I just think, unfortunately for South Africa, I think they played their final a game too early. They kind of peaked. They climbed Everest, whatever you want to call it. That they'd done that already, and it just felt like New Zealand just nicely built momentum the whole way through. And I think once they got to semi-finals as well, talking to them, there was just that belief of like, oh, we're actually going to do this. We're actually not that I hope we do or I hope this goes well. It was actually talking to them that they were really like, oh, it's happening. This is us. This is our time. This is our moment to win this. It's going to happen. And yeah, to see the way that they played, to see the way that they celebrated, especially for some of the old girls, they dubbed themselves the grandmas, and just how much it meant to them. I think it was just really special. I think it was yeah, it was really cool. And to have that happen, then to have the Black Caps go over to India, a series sweep, and then it's kind of cricket time now here. It's the very start of our home summer. You've got all these kids that are excited about cricket. You've got adults, you've got people that have loved the game for a long time, been involved with the game in a long time. All they want to do is get to cricket, go to cricket, be involved in cricket. So a massive 3-4 weeks for New Zealand cricket on the whole, and to me just perfect timing. It sets up our home summer perfectly. But yeah, a really special time, a really cool thing for some of those players, especially some of the old girls who'd been involved since I think they debuted back in 2005, 2006, to finally come to 2024. They'd had a couple of World Cup final losses under their belt. They hadn't been in semi-finals for I think it was 8 years. to finally win a world title, I think it is really, really special.
And finally, Frankie, I'm turning the spotlight back on you because endurance, longevity, and loyalty are three of my favorite qualities in sportsmen and women in any discipline. And you have had all three in abundance. A couple of days ago, you became the leading List A run scorer for the Canterbury Magicians, and the leading List A run scorer, men's and women's, for any team in New Zealand. Just think that's an incredible record. Canterbury Magicians, you passed Amy Satterthwaite's record of over 5,000 runs. There were times when you thought about giving it up, weren't there? I mean, you had injury problems, but you've kept going. How's the body? How are you feeling? You going to keep going a bit longer?
Well, I must admit, after playing 2 games at the weekend, I woke up this morning and breathing hurt. So I will say that it still feels like that. But no, it's a pretty special thing to tick off. It's been something that I don't hide behind it. I love the fact that stats are important in the game of cricket, and it's how you are remembered. It's your little legacy, I guess, that you leave in the game that's not for the people that you play with. Because I think the people you spend time with in a team, you get the chance to leave a different sort of legacy. But when you get the chance to leave some good numbers behind, write yourself into the record books a little bit, there'll be kids in 10, 20 years time that hopefully get to see your name there and go, heck, she must have been a bit of all right. So yeah, it's a special one. It's one that I've hoped. I mean, if I'm really honest, from when I first played domestic cricket as a teenager, I saw one player take her 150th wicket, and so I saw that happen, and she ended up setting the record at 158, and I think I was 18 or 19 at the time, and I remember saying to someone, whatever she sets the record at, I'm going to break that. So I managed to tick off the wickets last year, and then the last couple of years I've been trying to gun down the record that Amy set, but she's a little too good for me, so she kept pushing it out every game she played. She just made it a little more difficult, a little trickier, but yeah, to be able to sneak past her is pretty special. We played a lot of cricket together. We would have played probably 15 years of domestic cricket together, and kind of have been a big support for one another. So to sneak past her, who's a much, much better cricketer than I could ever hope to be, is it's a pretty special feeling. And yeah, Canterbury cricket's been very good to me. It's really is like home, when you debut when you're 17 and you get to your mid-30s, they've kind of seen every version of you and loved every version of you, even sometimes when you weren't that lovable. So yeah, to me, it's always a team that's very special to me. And yeah, anytime you get to pull the shirt on, it's just as special 200 odd times later as it was the first time you did it. So to get to knock off a little record is very nice. And now the challenge everyone keeps telling me is push it out as far as you can for the next person. So that's the next goal at hand. And yeah, it'd be lovely to push it out to something starting with a 6, but we'll see how the old body holds on, because it gets harder every year. I tell you that for free.
Frankie, we'll see you in a couple of days' time. Well, a week's time, I suppose. Thanks so much for your time. Congratulations. And we look forward to a coffee or a glass of something a bit stronger in a week's time.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Thanks for having me, guys, and looking forward to it. Can't wait for this series to get started.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.